An archaeologist recorded King Kong, but what happened later was shocking. George Lucas was a 45-year-old archaeologist. He had worked in many countries and explored many old places. But what made George different from others was his love for giant creatures. Since he was a little boy, he was obsessed with stories about dinosaurs and other beasts. While other kids played with toys, George read books about T-Rex and Megalodon. He believed that giant animals had once ruled the earth, and deep down, he hoped that maybe some still did. As he grew older, George spent his life digging up fossils and studying ancient bones. He had a strong team with him, people who trusted him, followed him, and shared his dream. In early January of this year, George heard something strange. People living near the Sahara Desert were talking about small earthquakes. These were not big enough to damage anything, but they were new. The locals said they had never felt anything like it before. George was curious. Earthquakes in the middle of the desert? That sounded unusual. And unusual was exactly what George was always looking for. He thought it might be a clue. So he gathered his team, packed their tools, and flew to North Africa. The heat was terrible. The sun in the Sahara did not forgive. Every step on the sand was heavy. But George and his team were used to working in tough conditions. They set up a camp close to where the earthquakes were reported. Then they placed small machines in the sand to measure ground movement. These machines would record every shake, every tremor, and every tiny wave coming from the earth. Days passed, then weeks. The machines recorded many small earthquakes. George and his team collected all the data and gave it to a powerful computer with artificial intelligence. They waited while the AI looked for a pattern. It studied the size, time, and place of each tremor. And finally, on March 12th, they got the answer. The AI found the source. The earthquakes were coming from deep underground, not from a fault line, not from gas or water, but from a single point, 100 meters below the ground. George was thrilled. He believed this could be it, the place he had always dreamed of. Maybe something was alive down there, something big. The team found a crack in the ground that looked like the entrance to a cave, but it was narrow and dangerous. The rocks around it were weak. A wrong step could cause the whole thing to fall. George made a decision. "I will go first," he told the team. "If I'm not back before midnight, call the local authorities and rescue team." He packed his backpack with some food, a flashlight, batteries, a small camera, rope, a knife, and a water bottle. Then he tied himself to a strong rope and began to climb down. It took him about 15 minutes to reach the bottom. When his boots touched the ground, he noticed something strange. It was cold, very cold. How could it be so cold under the burning desert? He looked around. The cave was dark and silent. The light from his flashlight moved across wet stone walls. A narrow tunnel led deeper into the earth. George took a deep breath and started walking. He walked for 2 hours. It was a long, dark path. The air felt heavy, but George kept moving. His heart was beating fast, but he was not scared. He was excited. Then suddenly, he saw something that stopped him. A light. A small glowing light was shining at the end of the tunnel. George frowned. This was impossible. They were 100 meters under the desert. There should be no light here. But it was real. He started running. As he reached the end of the tunnel, his eyes opened wide with shock. In front of him was a huge underground space. It was like a secret world. There were trees, plants, vines, water flowing in small rivers, birds flying in the air, and above all there was light. An artificial light source was fixed to the top of the cave, shining like a weak sun. George couldn't believe what he was seeing. It looked like a real forest, but it was hidden underground. He slowly walked forward. The air smelled fresh. It was cooler than the desert outside. George was amazed. He saw large mushrooms and glowing plants. It was like walking into a dream. Then something else caught his eye. On the ground, not far away, there were strange shapes. He moved closer and realized what they were. Eggs. Huge eggs. At least 2 or 3 meters tall. Their shells were thick and had a strange color. He counted 5 of them. George's heart began to pound. What kind of creature laid these eggs? He reached for his camera and took pictures. He wanted to go closer and touch them, but something stopped him. A sound. A deep growl echoed through the cave. George froze. The sound came again. It was loud, like thunder. George turned around slowly, scared of what he might see. And there it was. A giant creature stood just 20 meters away. It was tall, muscular, and covered in dark fur. Its arms were as thick as tree trunks. Its eyes were glowing slightly in the artificial light. Its face was like a gorilla's, but much larger, much angrier. It was King Kong. George could not move. His body refused to listen. He felt like a statue. One wrong move, and it could all end. The giant beast looked at him. It sniffed the air, but it did not attack. Maybe it did not see George as a threat. Maybe it was guarding the eggs. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, King Kong turned and walked away deeper into the cave forest. George fell to his knees. He had held his breath the whole time. His hands were shaking. He stood up slowly and looked around again. He needed to get out. He had seen enough. This discovery could change everything. Not just archaeology, but science, nature, history. He walked back through the tunnel, moving faster now. He climbed the rope and got out just before midnight. His team was waiting. They pulled him up and helped him sit down. George told them everything. At first, they didn't believe him, but then he showed the photos. The eggs, the forest, the light, and the shadow of the beast. The next day, they sent the data to top researchers. A secret team from the government arrived and blocked the area. They told George and his team to keep quiet. But George had already backed up the photos and notes. Now, months later, the world still doesn't know. But George remembers every detail. The cold cave, the underground forest, and the beast that should not exist. He still dreams about King Kong. Sometimes the dream ends the same way. The eggs are hatching, and more are coming.